Hi everybody, I'm Mingyan from GPSNR. So I'll just give everyone a minute or two to stream in before we start proper. Okay, great. I think we are ready to go ahead and start. So just an introduction. Hi, everybody. My name is Mingyan. I'm an associate from the Global Platform of Sustainable Natural Rubber, or GPSNR for short. So as we have members of the public here as well, I'm just going to give a short introduction of GPSNR and what it's about. So GPSNR is an international multi-stakeholder voluntary membership initiative. We bring together companies from different levels of the supply chain, smallholders, academia, and civil society to transform the natural rubber supply chain into a sustainable, equitable, and fair one. So some of the work that we have embarked on includes developing reporting requirements for our members and enhancing their disclosure requirements, building an assurance model and capacity building work for our smallholders in Thailand, Indonesia, and the Ivory Coast. So if you're interested in any of this work, feel free to drop us an email or a message. So for the session today, we will first have Ollie from Agridence here to present on the traceability pilot in Thailand, and Luca from Koltiva to present the traceability pilot in Indonesia thereafter. We will then have a 20 minutes Q&A, and I would request for you to keep your questions till the Q&A at the end of the session. Before I hand over the time to Ollie, I will quickly run through the purpose of the traceability project. So we seek to investigate the time and the resources required in order to establish traceability, such as in terms of cost or labor, for a rubber processor to map their supply chain in a complex supply chain such as Indonesia or Thailand. Our goal is to map at least 300 smallholder farmers in each country, and other information requested in the projects are the merits and limitation of each tool used, and the recommendations in terms of the scalability of the project to a larger scale. Okay, so the time over to Ollie. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mingyan. Okay, let's start. I will share the slides first. Good. Okay, hi everybody. So my name is Ollie. I work for Agridence as head of business development and partnership. And Agridence is a small tech company and started 5 years ago and provide solutions to the industry, not only rubber as well other commodities. So this project we have went through, and we did this project together with agri-tech, and we have here Mai and Brenda from agri-tech as well with me, and they will help me to share with you the findings of this project and the pilot, and as well, especially when it comes to the questions regarding what happened on the field, when the field team went out, what were maybe some of the challenges they faced, and they will help us, especially on this, because they were the guys, the ladies helping us on doing this. Okay, so I will go through this few slides, and again, as Minion said, probably the questions, I mean, feel free to pop up in the chat, but I think there is a time dedicated to reply them later on. Okay, so let me go down. Oops, that starts. Oh, okay, good. So first of all, the partners on this project was, again, as mentioned, was agri-tech, our Thai partner, and agri-tech engaged with the Raja Mangala University of Technology in Sriwijaya. This university helped us to identify 20 agriculture students, which then formed the field teams to run and to conduct the field activities in May this year, so some time ago. A special thanks, of course, in that case to Professor Sutanai Kerli and Professor Tat Wakao. Those two professors really supported us a lot, because a lot of training was needed to make this happen. The locations where we did this pilot was in Suratani and Nakhon Si Thammarat, because those were the two supply chains indicated by the processing partner in this project. So in fact, we were somehow 3 organizations contributing this project. So of course, being many different organizations involved, we needed a bit of training activities. So we needed to understand how the HCVRN questionnaire works. So HCV network dedicated 4 hours or half a day training time to do that. It's only 10 questions, but those are quite open, so it took a bit more time to go through. Rubberway as well was so nice and helped us to set up, of course, the system for us and go through the whole questionnaire to make sure that we fully understood and could cascade that on the field. The tool we used was Harmony. Harmony is a traceability app which Agridence developed for WWF. And of course, in that case, we had to train our partner agri-tech and the team on how to do that. The professors joined all those training sessions, and then they cascaded this learnings and the sessions again to the students, which had to went on the field to conduct the activities. So beside of that, of course, we had to prepare some, training material for the field agents. Okay, we did as well set up a JOT form in order to collect some more information on top of what was required by GPSNR in order to get a bit of a, let's say, a qualitative impression how the farmers reacted when they have been approached, what was maybe the major challenges they see. Okay, and there will be some comments on that. Okay, so let's start with, let's say, with the most, a bit more shocking number, in a sense that when it comes to the stakeholder engagement, we found a lot of, a bit of pushback from mainly the dealers. Out of, 40% of the dealers were not willing to participate. Nevertheless, they had been instructed, and it was communicated by the processing company, which normally is buying from these people. So that was it was a relatively high percentage of people not willing to join, to participate. It looked slightly better when it came to the farmers. 12% only, let's say only 12% of the farmers were not willing to participate, means didn't want that we map the plantation and ask them for the questionnaires. As probably Minyan mentioned in the earlier, so we had to map minimum 300 farmers, and then it was clear that we were not allowed to map those which is called tier 1 suppliers, companies or dealers or farmers which are supplying directly to the factory. So it had been, I think there was 30% or 100 maximum 100 farmers dealers of what we call the tier 2 sellers, and the rest has to be tier 3 or tier 4. Okay, that was one of the challenges we had. So main challenge in the whole project is convincing farmers, middlemen to participate. And then, of course, once you have reached out to them and they are willing to participate, you need to connect to the farmer. And that's another big challenge, because farmers are normally working on their farm early morning, 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock until 5, 6 in the morning. and then they might go for another job, could be in the construction business or something. But of course, the idea was to go on the farm together with them and to map their farm. So that has been one of the major challenges, as well. Once you have the members, the names of the farmers, and you can, I mean, first of all, difficult to connect to them and then to meet them on the farm. Okay, so I think one of the main focus of this activity is to what we call the part of socialization. So to explain to the farmers and the middlemen, of course, what's the purpose of this exercise and of what it consists. Normally, the team took around 8 minutes to do that. Because I think that's the most important. I mean, again, and they found, and that's what you see here in the middle, that when it came to the questionnaires, farmers or the middlemen were quite willing to easily to be convinced, whilst it was relatively hard to convince them to share with them the farm, the locations of the farm. I mean, and the data to the farm, the geolocation data. So that's what you can see in the middle. So normally no issue on the questionnaires, easygoing, relatively farmers willing to do that. But when it comes to the mapping, much more challenging. Okay, so we found that it's essential to get local authorities involved. So like in Thailand, it could be an RIT local office. It's important that the people, the field team somehow gets a kind of authorization. So we used in that case the university uniforms, but it's still, I mean, it's not an easy one. You still probably would be the best to get something like an ROT or whatever kind of local organization document to get this done. And I mean, again, it's this traditional top-down mapping approach. We found it as well a bit of a challenge because we really need to reach out to everybody. Okay, so that was, we found, we believe that probably a combination of a top-down and a bottom-up approach is more promising and more successful. So some facts about the farm mapping. So in that case, we were asked to map those farms which were, to collect the polygons for farms which has more than 4 hectares, which is then in line what EUDR requires. So 13% of the farms mapped where we took the polygon coordinates. In almost 50% of the farms we mapped, we had either no or a very weak signal at the farm location. That's quite a worrying part. I mean, as long your tool can work in an offline mode, no problem. But this is still, I mean, it's a challenge. And I mean, in that case, the team used only 9 minutes to go to the farm, but I think it was organized and measured in a way that, no, sorry, to map the farm, 9 minutes to map the farm in average. So we had a big difference between 2 minutes and 33 minutes for mapping farms. That's, of course, an average of mapping for GPS and coordinates / the polygons. Okay, so I think what is good in Thailand, there is a lot of public available data available. So once even your farm is maybe drawn or by hand because maybe the location has no or a very weak signal, you still can easily verify accuracy of those data. Okay, because a lot of publicly available data is there. Okay, as we mentioned before, farmers less comfortable to share the mapping, most likely because the mapping you can take conclusions of farmers' income, and people are not so keen to share that. I think that's quite normal. So we believe when it comes to polygon mapping, with the farm mapping, we would suggest to just go for polygon mapping instead of the GPS coordinates even for those plantations smaller than 4 hectares, because the additional efforts are not so big, / it allows you in a later stage, in case you would go for transaction traceability, to wait traceability data. And as well, I mean, in case of you go for other services in future and like to maybe set off carbon emissions, you might potentially use this kind of information in a later stage. So we think it's important, being the difference, the efforts needed to map the size as a GPS location or a polygon, not so big, we would always suggest to go directly for the polygon mapping. Okay, So this was quite a bit of a surprise. This was not part of, the goals or the tasks given by GPSNR, but we took some other information and we asked our field team to raise a few more questions to the farmers. And what we saw, for example, farmers were a bit uncomfortable to share with the field agents the date or time of tapping, okay, which is normally the larger time when they're out on the field, whilst they had almost no issue to share the time of when they collect and what kind of the weights they collect from the tapping activities. We understood that this is the main reason for that is that the farmers really didn't want to share when nobody is possibly at home, no? Because you would say that normally takes a few hours to do that, and they would share information when nobody's home, and they were very, let's say, reluctant to do that. And I think that's fully understandable. Okay, here we see a few examples of the plantation shape files we collected in Suratani and Nakhon Si Thammarat. Those were the two areas of the processing factory where they're normally sourcing their raw material. And we have converted those files into coordinates into the GeoJSON files, which is the one which would be required, is required by European Community starting from next year, or the year, sorry, then 2025. And we have shared those files formats as well with GPSNR. Okay, so when it came to the questionnaires, I have to say farmers were very supportive and really didn't feel, there was no resistance from farmers to cooperate in completing the questionnaires. The HCVRN questionnaire is 10 open questions. Took relatively long because all those questions are open questions. Took us 7 minutes to go through. But of course, people were very comfortable to share the responses with the field team. Rubber weight took a bit longer, bit more than 12 minutes to go through. Again, people were very comfortable to give responses to that. At the same time, it took us longer because the questions, I think, are much more than the ones of the HCV and RN. Okay, I think they're more or less 40, if I'm not wrong. Good. One of the main concerns when we went through was the privacy or security concerns using the tools. 40 to 50%. So we said it's a major concern to share with the field team the mapping data. And that was, of course, less for the questionnaires, but overall there was this major concern by the farmers. So again, they were cooperative, and they completed, except of 12%, completed all the tasks, but at the same time, they still felt that there is a certain worry about that. Okay, so I think what's important is to really communicate very carefully the purpose of the data collection, why we do that, and limit the number of data you collect, because it's easily that in that case, we had 2 questionnaires, we added a few more questions on our side that became quite heavy. I think it's important as well when it comes to EUDR to make sure you don't exaggerate and try to collect as much as possible information and try to limit on what is needed. Okay, so let's again have a summary. The summary on the time by activity. So we said it took the team 9 minutes to travel to the farm. I think that was mainly because the teams took this time from the connecting point, the town, to move to the farm. So that was why it's a relatively short time. The team were not located there, so they had to move that, and of course started from a central point to connect to the various plantations. Okay, in a certain area, which was, I think, almost everything very clear, close by. Socialization took 8 minutes, the mapping 9 minutes, the rubber-weight questionnaire 12 minutes, the HCVRN questionnaire 7 minutes, and the data verification done by team on site took another 9 minutes. So a total of 54 minutes, so close to an hour you get this done. Okay, and most of the field teams were minimum two persons. Okay, so the main takeaways from that, is GPS and polygon mapping is principally no problem. It can be done. Farmers not so keen, but it's, technically no issues. Even in the offline mode, you can do that, especially in Thailand, because you're able to cross-check data with existing data sources. And that helps you to make sure, even in case you have no signal, need to make it in offline mode, you can easily do that. Okay. The most time-consuming thing is to reach out to specific farmers or agent, because, as I mentioned before, they might be on a field in the early morning, then on a construction site, not at a farm, and that has been quite tough. They are reluctant to share information about their supply chain, the middlemen. That was one of the biggest issues, 40%. That's why 40% of the farmers or the middlemen didn't want to cooperate, because they are normally worried that once you share the information about their suppliers, they might be cut out of the supply chain. Okay, and that's the main worry why often middlemen are not keen or not. I will be very reluctant to share with you who are their suppliers. Okay, that's the main worry about that. As mentioned before, we had issues on the network, but this can be overcome as long as you start your app before you move onto the farm. And it's very important to have local authorities like the ROT involved. In Thailand, it's the ROT, then of course, different countries, different organizations. ROT stands for Rubber Authority of Thailand. Okay, when it comes to scalability, this is a bit of a tricky part. So especially when in Thailand, we understood that in let's say looking forward to EUDR, the Rubber Authority of Thailand, the ROT, has taken some measures to provide material which will be EUDR compliant. So they are working on trading material via a central market, and so we believe they would possibly not allow certain organizations to come into the country and do a massive mapping of their farmers. I think they have more or less 2 million farmers registered under ROT, and they would probably not allow to do that. Whilst it's possible that that the processor looks into its own supply chain and does that, but we believe it might be most likely not possible to do that as a GPSNR, to do that in a large scale, as long as it's not agreed with ROT at least. Probably very similar the situation to Malaysia, because MRB has as well a lot of Malaysian Rubber Board has a lot of information available, and in that case for Malaysia we are working. We as Agridence have signed an MOU with the Malaysian Rubber Board, and this the idea is to prepare Malaysia to become to promote Malaysian rubber and Malaysian EUDR compliant rubber. So the Malaysian Rubber Board, with its data, where they have a lot of data available for farmers and agents, and our platform will cooperate on that. I think the work will start next week on 7th of November, and that's fantastic news for us. Whilst it's totally different for Indonesia. Now, Indonesia is, I think there is very little data available. Probably no governmental initiatives exist. At least we are not aware about any. And so here you need to do something. Industry needs to do something. So we as Agridence initially had in mind to promote something what we called an industry-wide proposal in which industry works together. But I think that's a very difficult one. So probably it's really needed to work closely with, that producers work on their own supply chain and try to map that. Here, I prefer not to share the I mean, I think we provided a commercial proposal to GPSNR on mapping activities. So I found that probably not, and if I'm not wrong, GPSNR currently is still evaluating the various proposals. So that's why I didn't put here any data, any number for that, how much we think would be the cost to do that. Okay. Yeah, and that's I think all from my side. That's probably a bit shorter than the 30 minutes I had. Sorry for that. Okay, I would give it back to Minh Yen.
Okay, thank you, Ollie. So thanks for the great presentation. Yeah.
Okay, I stop sharing my screen.
Yeah. So now we'll invite Luca over to share on the traceability project in Indonesia.
Good. Okay, slides are clear? Yeah. Okay, yeah, nice to meet everybody. My name is Luca. For the people who haven't met me yet, I lead at Koltiva our rubber portfolio globally across Indonesia, Africa, and also Thailand. Maybe since I think there are a few more people on the call also from outside, so maybe I will just shortly introduce Koltiva and then I will go into our lessons learned when it comes to the traceability pilot, the GPSNR, and also lessons learned beyond the pilot as well. So Koltiva, we were established 10 years ago, and we are a global agri-tech company. We have our roots really in the EUDR requirements. So our application and platform can conduct supply chain mapping. We can also record transactional traceability from farmer to rubber processing factory. And we can also record capacity building initiatives in the supply chain. So the training of farmers. And beyond this, we also integrated the climate component. So you can also measure your Scope 3 emission. And in Indonesia, we also integrated a fintech component. And yeah, basically at Koltiva, we have 4 different business lines, and I think 2 business lines are relevant for the rubber sector. This is our Quality Trace platform. So tire companies or in general manufacturers and factories, rubber factories can basically use this app on their own for a software as a service fee. And on the other side, and this makes us also quite unique as a service provider, we also provide the boots on the ground services. So if you don't have the people on the ground, or if you want to have extra verification by a third-party service provider, then we can also provide the boots on the ground services for supply chain mapping, training and coaching, or supporting transactional traceability from farmer to dealer. We are a global agri-tech company, so we started in Indonesia 10 years ago, but we are a trusted player, not only in the rubber sector, but also in cacao and coffee. For Nestle, for example, we power their cacao and coffee and dairy plant in over 40 countries globally. We are also quite engaged, of course, in GPSNR and all the sustainability platforms. We are currently have active users in 52 countries and established 15 support offices there. So we can really adjust and speak the local languages when we onboard factories in each of the local countries. Yeah, we focus on many different crops. So we have 50 crops already in our system, but our core crops are cacao, coffee, palm oil, and rubber. And in rubber, basically, we started 2019. And we currently have around 14,000 smallholders registered on the platform and around 17 rubber factories across Indonesia, Thailand, and Ivory Coast. And yeah, we work in different constellations. So sometimes within this pilot through GPSNR, sometimes directly with the tire manufacturers, and sometimes also directly with a rubber factory. So in Indonesia, this is the places where we were active. This rubber project took place in in South Kalimantan and Central Kalimantan. But we have ongoing projects also from palm oil, since this area is often overlapping in all the rubber producing areas in Indonesia. So in Indonesia, we are working since 2019. And in Thailand, we just started in in this year in September. So in the last 2 months, I built up our Thai team now. And we also engaged with IoT. I agree with Ollie. In Thailand, IoT is really the key stakeholder. This is very different in Indonesia, where there's not such a dominant party. So it's also quite important to get their support. And we got their support in general to roll out our traceability projects in Thailand, and also implement the GPSNR coaching project in Thailand. So we have now around 600 farmers already registered in around 6 factories, and a lot of activities are just in the starting. And then for Koltiva, it's also similar. We just started last month. In the activities, there are some factories that are already starting on their own, some where we also provide the boots on the ground services to conduct supply chain mapping in the supply chain. So Koltiva, in rubber, the supply chain mapping work is still relatively new, but since we working in many different commodities, also including palm oil, we actually have done a lot of work when it comes to supply chain mapping work. So for example, with Golden Agri Resources, one of the largest palm oil company, annually we map around 20 to 30,000 farmers in their supply chain. So I think this is a bit to Koltiva, just in general for the people who don't know us yet. Now I'm happy to share a bit the lessons learned from our pilot, and I think they're very similar to some extent also what Ollie already has shared. So I think we all know the regulation, it's coming up, so I'm not going to go into detail with that, but later on, if there are questions, we are also happy to answer them. We are also in close discussions with the EU delegation in Indonesia and also in other countries. So in the pilot basically took place from May to July in this year, so already some time ago. And in this pilot, we mapped around 300 farmers, a bit more, 324. And we have mapped also 450 plantations. And around, a bit less than half was mapped with polygon. And when we look at the farmer, we see that around 26% of them were female. Many of them were more in the older age group. And in terms of the farm profile, the average farm size was only 1.4 hectare. In general, when we look in Indonesia, we only come to approximate 1 hectare on the average plot size. And also the rubber trees were already relatively low, with an average productivity below 1 ton per hectare per year. So this is a bit the situation that we faced. In the pilot, which is very interesting, and I will explain this, we actually worked across 2 provinces and 3 districts and 5 sub-districts, so also the geographical area was very large. And in the project, we, as Ollie already mentioned, we conducted we did the farm mapping, and we also collected the rubber risk assessment, which we also now developed our own risk assessment, basically, that is also integrated in our app, which can be collected basically during the data collection phase. And how we did approach the data collection was through a top-down and bottom-up approach. And Koltiva is basically recommending also this to the partners to apply a combined approach. So we first socialized to the rubber factory that was participating in this project, and then we identified their first-tier suppliers, and then we went all the way down to the smallholder farmer. So sometimes in Indonesia, we identified up to 5 tiers between farmer and the processing factory. Then there were certain situations where maybe dealers were also not as open to share their list of farmers. Sometimes they just shared us the village. In this case, we went bottom up, and we identified the villages that were recommended by the dealers, and we then mapped the farmers there and asked them who are they connected to. So yeah, in the first experience I want to share is about the socialization to the factory and to the supplier. So only within these 300 farmers, we identified 29 intermediaries. So I think this is quite a large number, and something that has to be considered when working in Indonesia. And we applied two approaches, so the top-down and the bottom-up approach, which we I think is necessary when doing this work in Indonesia and also in other countries. So this is a bit the overview that we also then provided to our clients. So we mapped all the dealers, and then how many farmers are related to which dealer in their supply chain. And also what we need to be aware of that is sometimes smallholder farmers, especially the farmer, they can actually sell to several buying stations. So there might be also in several supply chains at the same time. So what are the lessons learned for rubber processors and also for dealers when you do the socialization? I think first of all, it's very important to focus on one area. In this project, we really tried a large scope. So we also mapped. So the factory was located in South Kalimantan, but we also mapped in Central Kalimantan, but we also mapped farmers in North Kalimantan. And then also when it comes to supplier socialization, we also, similar that Ollie already mentioned, we also faced that some dealers and intermediaries, they were not so open. So here it's very important to get the buy-in also of the factory, that they do the socialization and introduce us to their suppliers. And then in the end, it's also what is always has to be kept in mind is also the bottom-up approach. So in Indonesia, what works quite well is that you go through the village government and then basically introduce the project there and then map the farmers from the village government. But what is important is that you first identify, okay, from which villages is the dealer at least sourcing. So this then, when it comes to the next step after the dealer and the rubber factory would be then the socialization to the farmer. Here we, on average, we found that the distance from our base camp was around 11 kilometers to the farmer's house. And then what always has to be kept in mind is that the socialization is then being done there. In some cases, we had to do the socialization a night before, just to get the farmer on board and to visit and schedule a meeting with them. So this can take quite some time in certain cases. We had around 21% that were a bit hesitant to participate and share data, but in the end, we were able to convince them. So we had no farmers that were not willing to participate in this project, but they were less willing to share certain type of data. Yeah. So for example, we tried collecting their ID card by taking a photo of them of it, and this was then in some cases a bit more challenging. Yeah, then we try to simplify a bit the mapping and risk assessment effort in a bit like a diagram. So first of all, it takes, from our experience, around 15 minutes to travel to the farmer's location. Here we now assume that we are visiting approximately around 3 to 4 farmers in the same village, so the time can be a bit reduced to that. Then it takes around 7 minutes to socialize to a farmer the project goal and the data consent, which is very important. And then what also needs to be kept in mind, then the field agent has to travel to the plantation, which can be again further away from the house. So there's also a certain distance involved. And then on the farm side, we then have the risk questionnaire. So in this project, we collected the rubber way questionnaire and also the HCV questionnaire and also Koltiva's questionnaire. So in the end, the time was relatively long. But basically, what we recommend is to stick to one type of questionnaire that can cover all the EUDR EUDR recommended requirements or required requirements, and then the risk questionnaire takes around 20 minutes, and the polygon taking can take up to 30 minutes from our experience. This is data from this pilot and is relatively high. And this is, in some cases, this can be a bit lower in terms of the polygon taking. This always depends a bit on the geographical area. And since this project took place in East Kalimantan, many of the field agents also faced basically forest rubber. So they had to kind of fight sometimes through the plantation, which of course increases then the polygon taking significantly. Yeah, overall, we then end up to like approximately 1.5 hours for mapping one farm of one farmer. Yeah, also similar to Ollie, we also recommend to apply polygon even for plantations that are below 4 hectares. And a bit the reasons for this is that polygons are more accurate. So if you have only one GPS coordinate mapped in the end and you want to do a deforestation verification, then you have to take a big radius around this GPS coordinate, and then automatically much more of your polygons will become incompliant. If you have the polygon, then you automatically know, okay, this polygon is compliant, this farm is compliant or not compliant. It also helps you with greenhouse gas emissions calculations later on if you want to measure your Scope 3 emissions. And also, and this is very relevant for Indonesia and not so relevant for Thailand, is it helps you to support these farmers with legality. And legality is another EUDR requirement, that the farmers, they have the right to use the land. And if you have already the polygon collected, then you can support the local village government in Indonesia to get at least the local village government that document that provides them the permission to use the land. While on a GPS collecting, this is required for the EU regulation for all the farms that are below 4 hectares. However, from us, it only requires around 2 to 4% extra effort for polygon mapping and costing. So what other lessons did we had during this implementation? First of all, in Indonesia, and this is especially the case in Kalimantan, we see many farmers that are inactive. So they just stopped harvesting their rubber on their farm. So here it's quite important to really focus on the farmers that are actively still harvesting rubber, because if you map plantations that are inactive, then this will also not lead you to compliant EUDR supply. So here it's quite important to agree on what is the mechanism on what farms to map and which farms not to map. Then sometimes it can be more challenging to schedule meetings with farmers. Sometimes they are only available in the evening, and that's the time where you do the socialization, and then you maybe have to arrange another time to actually map the farm. Sometimes, in some cases, farmers refuse to show personal data. So this is especially refers to the ID card or the legality document. So they were not, it's from our experience, it requires much more additional effort to get the legality document, for example, from a farmer. Sometimes farmers, their legality document is lost. Sometimes they don't have it. Sometimes it's in the bank. So it's quite a lot of extra socialization effort. ID card is possible in many cases with the right socialization of the project and the goals, but might be not possible for 100% of the farmer. Then another challenge that our field agents faced is the risk and hazard conditions when actually doing the work. Rubber farms in Indonesia are really different to farms in Thailand and Ivory Coast from my experience. So it's often forest rubber, and so that's why it's very important that the team is equipped with safety equipment, and that the farmer also has the adequate tools, like sometimes dirt bikes, to actually reach the plantation of these farmers. Then another important aspect is to keep in mind is the location of the farmers. So this is also something that we realized when we were doing the work in the rubber sector and mapping the supply chains. This is quite different to palm oil, for example. In palm oil, most of the farmers are located relatively close by to a mill. In rubber, this can be very different. We identified many suppliers that are located in other provinces. And I think in many cases, it's even likely that the rubber is sourced, or some of the rubber is sourced even from a different island in Indonesia. Then it's sometimes also challenging to socialize and get the dealers on board. Here, as mentioned earlier, it's quite important to get the support from the local factory in scheduling the meetings with the dealers and introducing our team. If they do this very actively, then the work's much easier. And then in cases where it's really difficult to reach a dealer, or the dealer is not able to provide a more detailed list of farmers, what is also always possible to do is the bottom-up approach to a village socialization in Indonesia. And then another aspect to keep in mind is national holidays during this pilot. It was during the Ramadan, Idul Fitri fasting period. So this impacted, of course, the project and the progress also quite significantly. So this was a bit related to the supply chain mapping efforts, and these were piloted in the GPSNR pilot project. But we've also wanted to take the time to share a bit about our lessons learned when it comes to transactional traceability and also the challenges out there. So we also had a discussion with the EU delegation in Indonesia around a month ago. And we also emphasized to them again that transactional traceability, so they basically said transactional traceability is required, but we emphasized to them that this is very difficult to implement from our side. We see there is some possibility of implementing it, but this is basically in two types of scenarios. This is in a direct supply chain, so a rubber factory, they use our app directly and then buy from the farmers directly. Then, of course, the whole control is with the factory, and then it's relatively easy doable. But these are very rare cases from our understanding. And then another possibility is to implement it in a simplified supply chain. So you have maybe up to 2 tiers in between farmer and rubber factory, which is often also not the case in Indonesia, at least. There you can have up to 5 dealers in between, from at least from this pilot, between farmer and factory. And then in addition, and I think this is a real challenge also for the rubber industry, there's a need to provide a financial incentive for the intermediary to use the app. From our experience, it is not enough that you train a dealer to use an application to record transactional traceability from farmer to factory, because for them it's a lot of additional effort, and it is quite a behavioral change process. So we see that maybe in the future this is possible, but at least if you look at EUDR implementation and your strategic decision is to implement transactional traceability, then you need to start thinking also about financial incentives that you give dealers to actually use the app to record the transactional traceability from farmer to factory. We see this very much working in the cacao sector, where farmers are, some of our farmers are Rainforest Alliance certified, and actually part of this Rainforest Alliance premium goes to the collector to use our app to then record the transaction data. However, since we believe this is quite difficult to implement for the industry based on our experience, at least until end of next year, we believe that it's quite important, or we believe it's already, at least to some extent, possible to comply with the EU requirements by mapping the supply chain. But what is very important when doing this supply chain mapping work is to also record the supply chain linkages between farmer and processing factory. And this is what we also done in this project. So what will then be possible if you record the supply chain linkage, then you will be able to identify, okay, these 500 farmers are related to this rubber factory, and these 500 farmers are related to dealer A, and these 1,000 farmers are related to dealer B. And then you can actually also implement segregation at your factory level. But it's quite important to actually record these supply chain linkages. And when we look at least globally, this is, I think, still quite a gap that we see in the market. So I think IoT already did a lot of great work. They have already a lot of data available, and also Malaysia, they have already a lot of data available. But what they currently know is the location of the farmer, but not necessarily to which factory they are supplying to, which will be quite important for the due diligence statement and the preparation for the EUDR. Another feature that or another process that is then also possible within our system that we did not yet pilot in this GPSNR pilot, but what we can also do then in the platform is the deforestation verification. So we can overlay the polygon with a deforestation map. We developed our in-house deforestation map based on Sentinel data, not using any more Global Forest Watch, because the Global Forest Watch data has the downside of being not less frequently updated. This is one side, and the other point is that it's also the spectrum is only 30 meters, while Sentinel data is 10 meters. And then based on the supply chain linkages, what is also possible is to then extract the due diligence statement for your shipment from the platform based on the risk data and the deforestation done through the platform. So what is now the scale-up roadmap for the rubber industry? We now on this slide, we highlighted a bit more about what would be actually the cost for supply chain mapping only, when assuming we would map all the rubber farmers in each of the country. So there's first of all quite significant cost, of course, coming into place. But I think each manufacturer and each factory also have to consider that not all this rubber goes to the EU. So probably not all of these farmers have to be mapped, at least until now. So how to prepare as a rubber factory or as a manufacturer using rubber and importing this to the EU? I think what is very important, what we recommend is to start traceability mapping as soon as possible. Don't worry so much yet about transactional traceability. You can try to pilot this, but as I mentioned, this is quite difficult to implement. What we suggest is first support the supply chain mapping in your supply chain, as there are only 14 months to go. And from our experience, it always takes time to build up a field team. Yeah. So if your factories in your supply chain are not yet starting, then it's really time to get started now, because building up a field team approximately takes also like a couple of weeks to up to 2 months to have a full team ready to actually then do the work. And then we suggest also to implement different approaches of supply chain mapping. So of course, one approach is that the processing factory, they use our app on their own or another app in a software as a service module. So this would be kind of the low-cost option for the processing factory. However, in this option, it's quite important to keep in mind as a manufacturer that the whole control is on the processing side. So if they map farmers that are not that are maybe located in forest area or high-risk farmers, it could be, I mean, not saying that any processing factory would do this, but it could be that they maybe not map certain high-risk farmers in this model. But it would be low cost and it would be relatively easy to start. But it will be also challenging for the factories to implement, because their core business is rubber processing and not actually supply chain mapping, which requires a lot of resources a lot of project management and also monitoring to ensure that the data is of high quality. Another module, and this is what we see currently being implemented quite significantly, is a hybrid model. So we provide our field team, and also the rubber processor provides some of his field team, and we basically do the work and implement the project in parallel. And then another potential possibility to have more assurance is to outsource this directly to a third party completely. So in this case now Koltiva, but this could be also to another service provider. So we think that probably, since the time is quite ticking, it's quite important to implement all three approaches at the same time, or at least in parallel, depending which what processor. And then it's we suggest to start with the most trusted processor, if not haven't started yet, and focus more on the core districts and sub-districts where you're sourcing from, because it always takes up to build up some field team. So if there are core districts, then this can really speed up the process on the ground. So I think this is a bit it from my side. Thank you so much, and now looking forward to some questions and answers.
Thank you, Luca, for the great presentation. So now we'll be moving on to the Q&A segment of the session. So we'll be looking at the questions in the Q&A box before we open up the time to the floor if we have extra time. So the first question is for Ollie. Was it difficult to initiate the initial connection with the dealers? For the successful interactions with the dealers, what were the incentives provided, communications mentioned that got them on board? Otherwise, what would you suggest to reach out to dealers more?
Yeah, as mentioned before, it's some cases it was not so easy to get them on board. I think what is crucial, how you, I mean, in that case, the processor who is setting up and guided us and our team on site to reach out to those traders or middlemen, how they, I mean, share the purpose of this initiative. I think, you know, I mean, I think for many people on the field, it's still an early stage. I think for us talking about EUDR, it's almost probably on a daily agenda, whilst on the field, people often would not know so far little about it, correct? So it's important that your processor supports you on that. He needs to open the door, because he is the person liaising on a daily basis with this supply chain. Again, here in that case, I mean, please then I would ask my colleagues from Agri-tech to correct me if I'm wrong. So there was no financial incentive to the middleman to open and to share up this supply chain. That's always a very tricky part. I think I saw something in the chat as well that I think will come up later. This question is always a tricky part when you start with that. But again, in that case, the middleman, there was no incentive given. And I mean, it was all based on relation. Did I cover the question? Is there something missing? I don't know who placed that question. Feel free to ask if I'm lacking here something.
Okay, great.
Okay.
If not, we'll move on to the next question. So to both speakers, Ollie and Luca, did all the farmers have official land deeds? If not, how did you handle those who did not?
Should I go first, Ollie?
Sure.
Can. Okay.
Yeah, so from our experience, at least in Indonesia, we see, so what we currently do is in most basic, or in most let's say the base project, is we ask the farmer what type of documents do they have, right? And if they don't have a document, then we ask them, okay, how long have you been on the land, to clarify a bit their occupation of that land. So we in this project we also asked this, but we did not try to collect the document. Yeah, I think this is something I want to start first of all. So it's quite easy to ask the farmer what type of document do they have. And from this data, approximately from our data in rubber in Indonesia, it's around 30 to 40% of farmers. They actually openly tell to us that they have nothing, no document, not even a village letter. So this is, of course, becomes then quite a challenge, and I think also a concern for the industry. Yeah, so that's why another question that we have now added to our survey is to clarify actually if they're occupying the land more than 10 years, which could be another classification of land use, right to use the land. From our experience, collecting the document is a lot of additional effort. Yeah, so if you are looking into verification of this requires much more resources and cannot be budgeted as a normal supply chain mapping effort, because farmers, they first really need to gain trust to share this document if they have it available, and sometimes it's also quite difficult for them to actually access this document. Yeah, this is the case in Indonesia. In Thailand, this is a bit different. Their farmers have a bit better record of their documents, but at least that's the case in Indonesia. Yeah.
In our case, I think I will ask Mai to help me on that, because Mai went with her team on the field, and I think Mai can give a better feedback on this.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ulrich. The thing is always be in backup that we have to ask for the origins use of the land title deed. Definitely at the very beginning when we contacted to the farmers, because it's not a requirement according to GPSNR, but we're asking them to show us the proof of land title deed in every case that we are going to. So in Thailand, the perspective is 20% have land title deed in different shape and form and linked to different type of legalities, but another 20% didn't have. But anyhow, they still have a mappings on their maps themselves, and Thailand is on progress of improving on that. So at this initiative of asking for the polygons at that very moment, we asked them voluntarily to prepare their land title deed with them. So if some didn't bring, so we get the coordinate, and if some, we can map the polygons. So the polygon mostly will back up with the land title deed type of the documents. So in this case, the land title deed documents is quite is 80% available in 1.6 farmers in Thailand. So it's possible to obtain these informations.
Okay, thank you, Mai. So if there are no further follow-ups, we'll move on to the next question. In Thailand, the average time for polygon mapping is 9 minutes, while in Indonesia, it's 30 minutes. Can you explain the large difference? What is the average size in Thailand? Because I'm quite surprised that it only takes 9 minutes.
Maybe, can I?
Yeah, okay, please go ahead, Mai.
Sure. The thing is, it's 9 minutes because of most of them have, if we could map polygon, it's because most of them have the land title deed in hand. So with the land title deeds in Thailand, you have XY, you also have a shape already. So you just have to trace according to the shape itself. So this is why it's fast.
Yeah, maybe another reason for this, and this really depends, is actually the conditions of the farm. Yeah, so there are, I guess, two conditions that need to be considered. 30 minutes, it took 30 minutes because the project was in Kalimantan and we face a lot of jungle rubber. Yeah, so you can't actually just so easily always walk through the plantation. Yeah, sometimes you have to use a machete actually to get through it because the farmer is not tapping so much anymore. Yeah, these are the reality, at least in in Kalimantan often. Yeah, in Sumatra, this can be very different from my experience in Indonesia. So it also depends geographically wise. Yeah, in South Sumatra, farms are much better maintained usually. So there we can be much below than 30 minutes. I think 30 minutes is really the maximum. And I think it is quite possible to do like a 1 to 2 hectare plantation, which is usually the average of a smallholder farmer, in around 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah.